So for this session today, we have Blackboard delivers quality classes with Amazon Chime SDK. So please welcome to the stage. We have our AWS presenter, Jenny Titema, and then we have Chris Stocking from Blackboard.
Hello and good morning, all. My name is Chris Stocking. I work for Blackboard as our Vice President of Software Engineering. I've spent the last 12 years in educational technologies in various different leadership roles, and I'm currently overseeing product development and delivery for our Blackboard Learn product. Is a role that is somewhat new to me in the last month, but prior to that, I was overseeing software engineering for our teaching and learning suite of products, including Blackboard Collaborate, our web-based virtual classroom.
Thanks so much for being here today, Chris. I'm Jenny Titema. I'm a Principal Product Manager for Amazon Chime SDK. I've been with Amazon, specifically AWS, for 6 years as of tomorrow. So I'm very excited to be here with you today and to tell the Blackboard story over the last 18 months or so.
Wonderful.
So before we dive into that, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about what the Amazon Chime SDK is. And then we're going to spend the majority of our time today really talking about how COVID-19 impacted virtual classrooms over the last 18 months, talk about the decision process that Blackboard went through for evaluating the Amazon Chime SDK, and then what that joint collaboration looked like. And then we'll leave a little bit of time at the very end for some Q&A, so make sure and save those questions up if you have them for the end. So a little bit about the Chime SDK. So it always is helpful to do a little bit of a history lesson for these sessions because a lot of our stories at Amazon start one place and kind of go another, different direction. And so in 2017, the Amazon Chime application was launched. And while we heard from customers that a lot of their use cases really did need a finished application, a lot of customers, like Blackboard, in fact, already had their own application. And what they were looking to do, instead of having a finished application, was to embed voice and video real-time communications directly into their own applications. And so while we still have the Amazon Chime application today, which serves hundreds of thousands of Amazonians and external users, what we've done since November of 2019, when we launched the Amazon Chime SDK, is work directly with customers to help them embed media services, phone integration, and messaging SDK directly into their applications. Most of what we talk about today is going to be focused on media services, which is where Blackboard is focusing today. But that is what originally launched in, like I said, November of 2019 with a JavaScript application. And so that's where we started. But over the last 2 years, we'll talk a lot about pace of innovation. We've actually expanded that application so that we're no longer just doing the media services, but we also have phone integration as well as a messaging SDK, which is all part of that all-encompassing Amazon Chime SDK. And so when we think about what is the Amazon Chime SDK today in 2021, we've got the media services, the phone integration piece, the messaging SDK, and not only do we have the original SDK for JavaScript, but we also have a React component library, which Blackboard is also using, and then we have the iOS and Android applications. So that's a little bit about the what of Amazon Chime SDK. But it's always important to talk not just about what it is, but how customers are using it and what those benefits are for our customers who are using the Amazon Chime SDK today. One of the things we hear repeatedly is that the SDK allows customers to build faster. These are ready to integrate SDKs, and you're going to hear a lot about this from Chris today, that are, hopefully we're abstracting away a lot of the complexity. We talk about undifferentiated heavy lifting. You'll hear that terminology throughout the course of the day. I think the second thing that we hear from customers is talking about simplifying operations. Media streaming and WebRTC is really a pretty complex area of code. And so for our users and our customers, they're able to use the global infrastructure of AWS and the media plane for the Amazon Chime SDK, which is in 18 regions and 52 availability zones. And they're able to do that at the scale and operation of Amazon without having to do that themselves. And so the last thing we hear from customers is really about extending the application. Because we are part of the AWS infrastructure, we're not just a standalone SDK. We allow customers to integrate with some of our AI ML capabilities. We can trigger workflows using CloudWatch and doing metricing. So you really are part of that AWS infrastructure, and you're not just building the media technologies, but you're able to use things like transcribe or comprehend and really build out that full suite of products within the application. So with that, I want to turn it over to you, Chris, and let you talk specifically about Blackboard and start us on our journey.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jenny. So Blackboard is a leading educational technology company that empowers millions of learners, educators, and administrators in higher education, K-12, business and government institutions around the world. We truly believe that education has the power to transform lives and societies, and our mission is to advance learning through the power of technology and in partnership with global educational communities. If you've heard of Blackboard before, it's likely due to our Blackboard Learn product, which is a learning management system, or LMS. An LMS allows us to sort of administer and deliver content in educational formats. So instructors will typically use the LMS for posting quizzes and assignments. And students will use it to take those quizzes, take those assignments. They'll check their grades, they'll access forums, and they'll be able to interact with their peers and their instructors. The LMS is also a hub for other educational resources, such as Blackboard's virtual classroom, Blackboard Collaborate. Blackboard Collaborate, what we see on the screen here, is a powerful and interactive web conferencing platform that really offers an immersive experience through the web browser. It utilizes a browser's native ability to support WebRTC for handling audio and video media streams. And instructors will typically use Collaborate to deliver instruction to their classrooms. They'll use some built-in capabilities such as an interactive whiteboard. They will use, in some cases, the recording features to pre-record the content and deliver that in more of a flipped classroom model, and many, many features that are specifically built for the teaching and learning paradigm, chronological hand raise, breakout groups, chat features, and more. It's important to note that Blackboard has been on a journey to migrate its products, including Blackboard Learn and Collaborate, to the AWS cloud for the last several years. And we've been working very closely with AWS to improve our cloud maturity on areas such as reliability and resiliency and scalability and cost effectiveness. And it's really important, to call that out and very critical that we did so, because in 2020, the teaching paradigm dramatically changed as institutions shifted their method of delivery from in-person instruction, or a mix of in-person and remote, to primarily remote instruction. And I'm going to show a graph here that sort of compares the usage month over month for 2 years, in 2019 and 2020, of Collaborate, and to sort of show the impact that the pandemic had on usage. I'll call out that this is a logarithmic scale. When we had sort of looked at it in just a standard scale, it almost looked as if prior to March 2020, there was no usage at all, right? Which was certainly not the case. There were many, many institutions that had been using Blackboard Collaborate over a long period of time. But again, they were primarily using it to augment their physical instruction that was happening in brick and mortar institutions. Certainly had a handful of institutions that were delivering 100% online, but by far and large, the primary use cases were to sort of support in addition to physical instruction. So I remember in late February and in early March, our SRE team, our Site Reliability Engineering team, sort of raised their hand up and said, hey, Chris, we're seeing some anomalous usage patterns that are coming out of our Asia Pacific region. That region was in particularly Australia and New Zealand, were going through sort of a back to school event. So it was a little bit hard to shake out what was back to school traffic and what we were seeing for usage there versus what was truly anomalous. But that quickly became clear as the world shifted, country by country, continent by continent, over to primarily delivering education online and using Blackboard Collaborate. And in the span of about 4 weeks, we saw, again, starting from Asia Pacific, going to the Middle East, going to Europe and Africa, and then finally in the Americas, we saw that usage increase about 45 times what we had seen as our peak global maximum in the year prior. And then again, we saw another increase in September and October, which was only a factor of 2, but still 90x what we were doing compared to 2019. And I remember going through that time period in March 2020. It was, just seeing the usage patterns change dramatically and very, very quickly. We were working closely with AWS on our capacity planning and on contingency planning, and that was really how we were first introduced to Amazon Chime. It was pretty much as a contingency plan for additional capacity. I remember it was so busy that we were trying to get the meeting off the ground, and it took us like 3 to 4 weeks to actually do that.
Yes, I've made the joke that it was that first date experience where somebody's trying to set you up, and it's like, you two would be great together, you just need to meet and go on the first date. And so we spent a lot of time, actually, like you said, trying to connect because you were not alone. This was the story that customers all across the globe were experiencing. And if you think about the time, things like fitness classes needed to go online. Online gaming became big because you were all of a sudden trying to connect with colleagues that you were used to going in and seeing every day. So there really wasn't an industry that wasn't touched by this global pandemic. And when we think about media, online media, and what it means for real-time communications, this was just such an incredible time of growth. And so even internally, we were supporting our own application with, like I said, hundreds of thousands of Amazonians that went from using it, yes, as a tool at work, to the sole means of communication. And I think that was the shift that we really saw in 2020, much like Blackboard, that it went from something that customers were using as a tool to really the sole means of communication. There was no other way to talk to your colleagues. So.
Absolutely, and in many ways, you could almost look at this. I mean, certainly Blackboard experienced this, but it was almost like the launch of a new product, right? Because the paradigm had completely changed. The way that we were delivering value to our customers changed. The way that systems responded to usage changed. The way that we were able to observe those systems changed. And Collaborate had always been used in a very important way in the teaching and learning experience. But now it was truly mission critical because in some ways it was the only avenue to support the connection between the educator and the learner. So I have up on the screen a couple of principles around site reliability. And site reliability engineering is kind of an area that focuses on ensuring workloads are performing correctly and consistently when they're supposed to. And that was clearly an area where we needed to shift to rapidly. And fortunately, leading up to this point, we had done a couple of things to make that shift possible. We had designed the system to be resilient and adaptable. I mean, kind of as an easy example, we had implemented auto-scaling groups that were able to pull capacity across multiple availability zones, right? So it was possible for us to be able to pivot quickly towards reliability, but it was very much to us a black swan event, right? It was something that we almost impossible to predict, but in retrospect, it was almost obvious that something like this could have happened and did happen. And I want to give a shout out to our engineering teams and to our partners at AWS, especially the TAM and SMEs that were supporting us through this very busy and tumultuous time. Other challenges of scale have to do with operational challenges, right? Not just how the systems are designed to be resilient and adaptive, but how do we get through the enormous amount of operational toil that was generated from the increase in usage. We obviously had to counter it with a mixture of people and code, but that was challenging to do, and especially challenging to do at scale and get right. There were new factors in the equation. We had to be very, very sensitive about how we were rolling out changes in a new way. We had to be very, very cognizant of things like local academic calendars and really understand the risk profile of changes and what would happen with potentially a bad change. And how do we roll back quickly if we needed to do that. So we had to work very, very hard to make sure that the systems could respond at the scale that we were delivering. There were some things that just didn't scale well, right? And you had to put people on it. For example, I look at our deployment and release process. We've got a deployment process that's largely automated, but the release management of that is something that's very, very complex and requires a person to actually drive it, right? So it was very, very time-consuming for the team to sit down and go through all the different changes, to work through the logistics of releasing that out in the wild. And some of it was arguably, sort of outside of our direct sphere of influence to control. There were a lot of different dynamics that were going on at this particular point in time, and Collaborate being sort of reliant on media streams, there's an enormous sensitivity to things like public transit networks, right? The connection between the end user and the service hosted in Amazon matters quite a bit, and when there's a disruption, you have to understand, is that disruption happening in the end user's local environment? Is it happening in our environment, or is it happening somewhere in between? And it's not always obvious to pinpoint where that happens. We saw, very, very strange anomalies where entire countries would have a network disruption, but it was only localized to those countries. And to the end user, right, to our clients, the fact that it happened was important to them, and they wanted to know that we sort of had our arms wrapped around it, and that we were making solutions to it, even if it was outside of our direct sphere of influence. So there was this sort of mad scramble as teams dropped everything to help each other out, to work through different time zones and kind of support each other through this, and continually adjust our operational plans in light of the pandemic.
Yeah. And I think, again, we just saw that time and time again about customers working through individual struggles. In some cases, there was an existing application. In some cases, customers weren't in the position that Blackboard was in. They did not have everything built out to the degree that Blackboard had it. And they were having to quickly come up and build an application basically from scratch in a matter of weeks or months. So seeing those, that whole spectrum of everything from customers with loads like Blackboard of moving, hundreds and thousands of students online, to situations where they had to do it for the first time. Customers basically were starting from scratch. And so I think we've seen kind of that whole spectrum over the course of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so about this time last year, when the dust had sort of settled from the first wave and was starting to ramp up for the second wave, we sort of sat down and asked ourselves, were we happy with the new direction, right? The world had changed in such a rapid and substantial way. And it goes sort of without saying that we were enormously proud of the accomplishments of our teams and with the support of Amazon. So when we looked at that, we were obviously very, very proud and very happy. But when we looked at other things, such as the impact that shifting to reliability had on our pace of feature delivery, right? we weren't happy with those results. We wanted to make sure that we were providing the best possible virtual classroom for our customers, and the impact of COVID and the impact of scale really caused us to kind of divert resources that otherwise we would have kept focused on feature delivery, right? And so we realized that we needed to change, but we weren't exactly sure how. And we didn't know if that was going to be, sort of small enough where we could generally persevere and just kind of fine-tune some areas, or if we needed to make a pretty significant pivot. So the factors that I've described here are sort of somewhat unique to Blackboard, but also relevant for other customers. And Jenny, I'd like to know, what have you seen with other Chime customers? Does this, kind of meet the same expectations, or are they different?
Yeah, like I said, it's a little bit different with Blackboard being on a migration journey. We have customers that are migrating and do have something that they're trying to move over using the Amazon Chime SDK. I think the thing about all the customers when we talk to them is this pace of innovation. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. How do we help customers really focus on what they know best? In the case of Blackboard, it's students and instructors and teachers. In the case of online fitness, it's, again, those students that are taking those classes. If it's gaming, or it's telemedicine, or it's doctors and patients, thinking about those applications, we know that you're the ones with the expertise. You're the ones who know your customers and your end users. And so what really we're trying to do is take that media piece of it out of the way. Like, let you focus on the customer, and then use that heavy lifting piece of it so that we're delivering value, basically like two engineering teams, because we're not forgetting what is important about media streaming. We're just not requiring that you do it, or that our customers do it. So I think that story, I'm super excited to tell it with you today, because I think it's what we're seeing again for customers asking about, like, well, is there another way, so to speak?
Absolutely. So a little bit of a spoiler alert. Blackboard did announce that we are moving to the Chime SDK. We did that in July in our last round of Blackboard World. I think it might be a little bit weird if we hadn't made that announcement.
We probably wouldn't be here today if that decision didn't go that way. So.
And so the rest of the story is really taking you on that journey of the decision process and what factors we sort of identified that I think are sort of consistent with many other companies that ultimately make the move. So again, we sort of were at this inflection point where we knew that we needed to either pivot or persevere, and that caused us to really get down into the nitty-gritty of aligning with our core value proposition, right? As Jenny was saying, we are experts in delivering the virtual classroom. The thing about the virtual classroom, it is very, very dependent on streaming media services, right? Like we could not have Blackboard Collaborate today operate independently without having those media services. And it's really, really challenging to sort of disentangle that heavy dependency with where you want to invest your engineering talent. And so we were sort of in this position where we had to make a choice. Do we continue to invest in a little bit more of the web conferencing capabilities, or do we primarily invest our engineers in differentiating within the virtual classroom? And what we needed to do was really understand whether that was a space that we wanted to be competitive in. Jenny mentioned undifferentiated workloads, right? When you've got a service that is undifferentiated, you're sort of indirectly competing in that space whether you want to or not, because everyone is sort of reinventing the wheel in the same way. And we had to understand, what would the implications be if we stayed investing on that front? Was it something that we wanted to do? And frankly, what would the implications be if we didn't continue to invest in that front?
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting as we talk about undifferentiated heavy lifting. The reality is that WebRTC is an ever-changing space. So while the world, while it might not be something you wanted to focus engineering efforts on continuously, part of that's because we knew it's changing. And so I mentioned having two engineering teams basically working in parallel. Us on these quote-unquote undifferentiated heavy lifting, but with the opportunity to differentiate, with the opportunity to bring in features like voice focus, which I know Blackboard is looking to use, to take some of that echo cancellation, some of those things, barking dogs, all those things that students at home are definitely going to have experience, and then use the SDK to bring that in without the heavy lifting. Absolutely. So the features can be can be differentiated, but the actual integration and bringing them in is hopefully abstracted away for customers like Blackboard.
So another critically important component of the process is really understanding the people that are responsible for delivering the services, right? In the case of Blackboard, we had already sort of built the service. We were delivering it in production. We had a product that was out there, and it was working well, right? And Blackboard had sort of assembled the engineering team over many, many years, somewhat through acquisition, and they were responsible for delivering a critically important component for Blackboard Collaborate, and frankly, a very, very complex component when we think about our overall, ed tech technology stack. And there's kind of two things in my mind that come to mind when you think about the change that a business goes through with the services that it's delivering related to people, and that is sort of how the business is looking at the engineering teams that are delivering the value, and how those engineers view themselves through the projects that they are working on. And I think it's very, very easy when you think about, kind of, if you're moving in a direction where you might partner rather than build yourself, it's very, very easy to just kind of associate, well, there's a set of engineering teams that are doing that work, and they're no longer going to be doing that work, or at least in the same way in the future. You sort of think that the value that the engineering teams are providing are directly associated just with the project that they're on. And fortunately, that was not really an issue with our journey. We've got a rock star of an engineering team that provides a lot of value, but it's sort of the way that we look at them as problem solvers and as value creators, and the amount of time we spent, really focused on understanding their transition of value from current state to future state. But that's only half the battle, frankly, because there's also often an emotional component to software development where the engineer has a lot of sweat equity in the software that they're developing. And this is, I find, a lot more common when you have engineering teams that are sort of sweating it out together. They're working on very critical, time-sensitive components, very much like the conditions that we had with COVID. And this was definitely a concern that we had, in just supporting the engineers through the process. And it really requires leadership to step in, to really articulate with transparency the challenges that the business is under, to enlist and empower the engineers, or at least a subset of the engineers, to be part of that decision-making process, and to really support those engineers through the change curve. And I call that out because if you don't really get this part right, it can be very easy for engineers to either get washed out or burnt out, and that can really inhibit your long-term overall goals.
For sure.
And finally, we'll get into a couple of other important, I'll say, hidden cost factors. Obviously, there's the overt actual budgetary concerns of cost, and that's especially true when you're kind of going from homegrown to partnering with a service. We didn't spend a whole lot of time of that in our presentation today, and that for the very reason because you've got to get that right? You've got to set up the business in a way that financially the numbers work. If you don't get that right, it's not going to work out well. What I've got up on the screen here are really more of the hidden costs that in some ways are a little bit harder to articulate, but incredibly important in the delivery of value. So first and foremost, we had spent so much time on ensuring a high level of reliability with our product. And that was absolutely an area where we could not give up any ground on. We really strive to ensure that the virtual classroom is available to any learner anywhere, right? We sort of have intentionally designed it so that it is browser-based, easy to start up, doesn't require additional plugins or software, can be used by most computers, tablets, or devices. And so it is used in a very diverse set of conditions and with varying network performance, right? And so that was absolutely an area where we just could not give any ground up on, because we wanted to ensure that we were holding the bar high, either at least as high or higher to the level of service that we were previously delivering through COVID. We think about sort of the features that are critical with streaming media, and Jen, you kind of talked about this before. There are certain features that are innovative, but they eventually become table stakes, right? And you spend a lot of time trying to play catch up in some cases, and we ultimately needed to understand whether we were going to invest ourselves in trying to be innovators in that space, whether we were going to invest ourselves to at least keep pace with the market, or whether we were going to trust a partner like Amazon to help carry that heavy lifting. And I will say it's certainly a delight when you're able to get features for quote unquote free, because Amazon is carrying that heavy lifting in the development effort. And then finally, and again, this one is really, really hard to articulate, but it's the lost opportunities from engineers focusing on what would be a critical component, but not a differentiating component in the product space. Again, for streaming media, critically important for us to get right. Blackboard Collaborate would not be a product without streaming media. But what are we leaving on the table? Because the engineers are focused on streaming media and not focused on differentiating within the virtual classroom. And ultimately, we made the decision to partner with Amazon and utilize the Chime SDK services because of the confidence that we have in Amazon's ability to deliver the services. Certainly we've been we've been building on the Amazon cloud for many, many years. But we've also seen, sort of in real time, the value that comes from working directly with the Chime team and seeing the benefits of that reliability. Very, very happy with the pace of innovation from the Chime team. And again, it's a special experience when you're able to get engineering teams together and really empathize with each other, right? We truly believe that Amazon understands our business needs and our customer needs and can help us move the ball forward.
And I think that was one of the things that we heard right away was about students. Here are students on potentially devices that aren't very powerful. They've just kind of gotten them thrown at them. They're in all corners of the globe. They're on unreliable network. I will say that the test cases that came from Blackboard were definitely challenging in the sense that operations and reliability point, we know it's super important for all of our customers, and customers are not always sitting on a one-year-old machine in high-speed internet conditions, and so being able to take that direct feedback from Blackboard and say, okay, well, what can we do better? And like you said, really just build together and hear directly from engineering use cases and QA experts who'd been in the field for years, and they've been on that journey. And so I do really think that, like, in factoring the cost, us working directly with customers helps us be able to answer some of those questions, because it's not just economies of scale from a fleet management perspective. It's also taking those customer pain points and taking those and scaling those and saying, like, you might not be having this problem today, but we're pretty sure you're going to have it in the future. Is there something that we can do from a core SDK perspective to make your future build experience better?
So as I said before, Blackboard made the decision to utilize the Chime SDK services to build on top of them to power our virtual classroom. And I'm going to go through kind of some of the steps from a timeline perspective and how we look at delivering it to our customers. I will call out again that in Blackboard's journey, it might be different than some other companies because we had we have an existing product with existing expectations on how that product works. And so there was a fair amount of sort of feature parity that we had to kind of at least consider and work through in support of our customers. But really, going back to the beginning, right? Step number one is validating the technical feasibility, right? And that's going to be somewhat self-evident here, but you need to have your engineers engaged really very, very early on in the process and working with engineers on the other side to really ask tough questions and ensure that it is going to be a good fit from a technical perspective. If you can't get through the technical feasibility, again, this goes without saying, but it's not going to be a good fit. Very quickly, we knew that this was going to be a good fit, and so we sort of transitioned to the proof of concept phase. And this is where I think things get a little bit more interesting because when we were delivering a proof of concept, it wasn't just like, hey, we can build an app and show that it works. I mean, certainly there's plenty of material out there that shows that it works, but to us, that wasn't really all that interesting. We wanted to actually show what does Collaborate look like powered by the media services from the Chime SDK, right? Showing those video tiles coming from the Chime SDK rather than our own sort of architecture. And it was also exciting because there were some benefits that we got out of just doing that, right? Higher quality video, higher quality screen share. The voice focus is an area that we're looking at right now. But we wanted to get that out into the market as quickly as possible. So delivering value sort of ASAP. And I'm going to kind of walk through some concentric circles. The way that we sort of looked at adoption was first focused inward, right? We sort of had to ensure that we had the confidence ourselves in utilizing the product, the new product, and establishing sort of new benchmarks with it. This also gave us a little bit of an opportunity to drink our own champagne, right? And certainly with our own employee base, we have a high bar, but a little bit more tolerant as things go through the development process. So critically important for us to get that feedback through our own usage of Blackboard Collaborate plus Chime. And then, sort of as we add those additional features, we kind of layer that on, we get to a point where it becomes sort of a minimally viable product for our customer base. And this is an area that we're sort of right on the cusp of right now, being able to opt in to utilizing the new experience. And there's a ton of clients that are really clamoring to use this experience, right? Because they see the value in the new audio and video streams. They see the value in the new screen sharing. And so this will give us a really great data point on, again, meeting the bar for a large and meaningful subset of the overall customer population. And we'll continue to sort of provide feature parity, right? We've had to go through all of our features like breakout groups and telephony and sort of rewire them to be able to work with the new Chime SDKs. But eventually, sort of over time, we sort of iteratively transition over to the Collaborate plus Chime experience until eventually we get to the point where we're sort of fully on that Chime experience, and that is the default.
So a little bit more about parity. I mean, I think this has been something that's interesting, is that when you have an application and you've been building it for years, there are layers and layers of features on there, and we've talked about like what parity looked like as we were kind of on that customer journey together. Any insight from Blackboard's perspective about decisions you've made along the way, especially in that outer circle, or I guess like where it's parity versus do you make a feature change?
Yeah. And that's been a really interesting but challenging conversation, right? Because when you're in educational technologies, right, you really have to think about change management, especially when you're thinking about changes in the middle of a semester. There's really no period of the year where there's not sort of active courses running. And so you have to think about the institution's ability to support any differences in the features that we're providing. But it does provide an opportunity for us to look at features from the ground up. And I think we certainly did that with some things like bandwidth management policies and to make that a little bit more sort of organized and effective.
And the reporting's different. I mean, being able to use AWS, like the way that you're going to get reporting is going to change. And
Exactly.
so just a direct transfer of, well, I need to run all of these reports. Well, if you can't actually be the one that's influencing the bandwidth management, like, do you need the same report, or do you actually need just the mechanisms to be able to understand what AWS sees? And so I think we've worked through a lot of those things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And really for us, the difference is with anything that would potentially affect the customer's use, right? You have to be very, very careful about changing the goalpost there. But there certainly, for anything that was sort of internally focused, we had a lot of value in sort of reopening the hood in conjunction with the Chime team to really understand, is what we had best, or do we need to kind of rethink what we had?
Which I think is really important about deriving the full value from a managed service. If you're going to make this change, if you are actually going to like rely on a third party to be able to provide those services, I think if you're not making those decisions, you're really missing an opportunity. Because when other time will you have the, to your point, the hood open and be able to make some of those changes? And I think that's what we've seen with the majority of our customers, that they're not necessarily, to your point, on a migration journey. In some cases, it's net new, but it doesn't look radically different from what we see here today. They're starting with a very small group. They're starting with some kind of a POC. We're trying to help customers get to that POC phase as quickly as possible, because yes, there are demo applications and sample applications, and they want to be able to see how that works. But more importantly, they want to be able to develop within their own application, and as quickly as possible get to a place where they can see that they are going to be offering value directly to their customers. And so, yes, this is an example of Blackboard's customer journey, but I think it's very representative of what we see customers going through, which is starting small and then expanding as they go. And in Blackboard's case, you had a really good idea of what your usage looked like. You were very quickly and carefully tracking that plus 45 time growth. But for many of our customers, they don't necessarily have that kind of visibility into what the application usage is going to look like. And so being able to offer it potentially to a small audience and then continuing to grow that across their user base, I think this kind of rollout and this kind of strategy makes a lot of sense for a lot of customers.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about what did this look like, boots on the ground. You've mentioned the two engineering teams, but it's really great to talk about it in the abstract. But I think now we're going to dig into a little bit more of the tactics of how we were able to work together on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to get to the stage that we've gotten to today.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about this pace of innovation piece, and we've mentioned you're not supposed to have favorite slides, but this is kind of our favorite slide, just because it really hits on all of those areas that we talk about. And this is really where we kind of saw that joint DNA. We've got this metric, this number that we throw out at AWS, where around 90% of our roadmap is directly influenced from customers. And I think oftentimes you hear that and you're like, is that really true? But the reality is our roadmap does change on a monthly basis sometimes, because what we're doing is working directly with customers who say, we actually don't need this feature, we do need that feature. And that means that you can't necessarily get up and present a 12 to 18 month roadmap, because you know things are going to change. And so being able to use customer feedback and having those direct customer relationships really feed into how we develop our roadmap is one of the things that I think has been super exciting about working at Amazon. And I know that there's a lot, that's basically how we've developed the service over the last 18 months. So.
Yeah, and that's been really, really exciting. The pace of innovation was really a critical part that we wanted to get out of the engagement. And I will say it provides a ton of confidence as a buyer and a builder to work directly with the engineering teams and to see that the feedback that we're providing is really getting influenced and taking action in the roadmap, in some cases pretty rapidly, right? Pretty quickly. So, again, it was another sort of waypoint in the journey, but really increased a lot of confidence in our decision to go with the Chime SDK.
And I think the roadmap sharing moving into that area is we were both incredibly transparent with what we as the Chime team were building, and then you were as a customer very transparent as to where you were going. And we often use the analogy of like skating toward the puck at the same time, and we weren't completely sure who was going to get there first in some cases. But what we were able to do was to put things in front and say, well, don't spend a lot of time doing this because in something like, and we can talk about the managed features, we're going to be doing recording. So Blackboard, we know that you need recording. We're going to be working on recording. You focus on some of these other areas, and we'll focus on this messaging, or the media capture feature, which is our recording feature. And so I think that transparency of roadmap in both cases, even knowing it's going to shift, provided an ability for the two engineering teams, like you said, to really work very closely together.
Yeah, very, very closely and very effectively.
So this collaborative builders, so we've talked about our engineering teams and how closely they do work together, and just having messaging rooms where they're just sharing feedback directly, doing these technical deep dives. I think that's been one of those areas where, like you said, Blackboard had a ton of expertise to be able to share, and just the willingness to be able to work directly with engineers and say, here are the things that are working, and here are potentially some of the things that are not working. Media capture, we talked about that one a little bit, and the recording features. This is one of my favorite stories, just because that was where, as a product team, we were headed in a very specific direction. We knew we wanted to be able to get something out to customers fast and get something out right away. And so we were going to capture all these media streams. And then we talked to Blackboard, and Blackboard said, well, that's great, but we're really only interested in the active speaker. That's really all we need. And so that conversation was one that allowed us to then go back, yes, have a little bit of a change in our timing. There was a couple weeks, and Blackboard said, well, for a couple weeks, we'd still rather have the active speaker stream. And so being able to work through that partnership and that very intentional, talking about features specifically and not just talking in the abstract, but diving deep, I think that's been one of my favorite parts about the relationship.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it was great to see us take that development effort off the table, right? We think about that pace of innovation. We think about sort of lost opportunities and opportunity displacement. We could take that development project, maybe not entirely off,
Right.
but dramatically trimmed it down because AWS was sharing in the heavy lifting.
So I think that we've talked about the media capture feature. I can talk a little bit more about some of the other features, transcription, and the ability to not maybe potentially use a feature right away, but know that it's coming and be able to make those plans for a roadmap as well. So transcription, comprehend, I know that's something that we've talked about the Blackboard team of, and it's again that pace of innovation of, if we know these features are coming, if we know that this is an area that Amazon is going to go, can we have those conversations early so that we're influencing the roadmap and the direction? And having that early beta experience. I've made the comment before that if you're doing betas and you're not allowing time for that customer feedback to really influence your product direction, then you're just releasing product early. And so that relationship with Blackboard, I think, has been super important for us to not just get features out to Blackboard, because they don't just go to Blackboard, they go to all of our customers. And so being able to have the ability to build out that relationship and then build out features and figure out well, where are those places where it's not unique to a single customer, but where are the places where we can add value to all of our customers by making changes in the core SDK.
And that's been great to sort of understand, where do we need to be in our long-term planning, right? And how do we partner with Amazon, not just for what we need today, but 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, based on new services and the direction that Chime is going.
Yeah. I think one of the things that then comes up is okay, well, this is great. It sounds like you and Blackboard worked together a lot, and yes, we did. But the reality is the process has to scale as well. And in some cases, it doesn't, like while we want to talk to as many customers as we can't necessarily have these kind of deep dive discussions with all of our customers. And so some of it is about how do we have that roadmap transparency? How do we have mechanisms in place that really allow us to talk to customers about where we're going next? To have that same kind of like skating toward the puck analogy without having a real-time conversation. And so one of the things that we've recently released was the GitHub project board. And so all of our code is available on GitHub, and then we've also started to talk to customers and allowed them to bring those feature requests directly to us, and then work through the process. Like, is this something that we're considering? Is this something that we know we're going to do? And have that more collaborative and interactive experience directly on our GitHub project board so that customers do know where we're going. Because our goal is that customers not build things that we are going to build for them. And so if you can't have that individual conversation and work through it directly, how do you do that at scale? And one of the ways that we've been able to do that is by publishing our project board so that hopefully customers are asking questions about, well, what is coming next, and not building in areas that we plan to go. So I think it's been an absolute pleasure, Chris, to be on this journey with you. I'm super excited to be able to tell this story because for me it has a lot of personal, I have two young kids who experience these platforms, and so I have that personal aspect to it. We do have available today many of our Chime SDK samples and demo code. That's all available on our GitHub repository. Tyler put together the nice scan for us, so if, hopefully it works. My phone only works half the time, but we do encourage you to dig in, to take a look. Like we said, our goal is for you to be a builder within this space, so we want to empower builders to be able to get started right away. We have customers who say, like, within a day or so, they've got something up and running, and that's exactly what we want. And so, do take a look at the Amazon Chime SDK samples that are available on the GitHub repository. Again, Chris, can't thank you enough for being with us today. It's just been a pleasure to be on this journey.
Absolutely, and right back at you. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with the Chime team and to see the value that we're doing together.
Awesome. So we did allow a little bit of time for Q&A. So if you
really only a minute, I think.
Did they reset our timer?
Yeah, the timer.
Well, I say we recapture the time they took from us when we were. So we do have a little bit of time though, if anybody has one or two questions. Okay. Well, if not, thank you again. I think we have one more slide which has the survey code on it. Thank you again for joining us for this early session. We appreciate you kicking off Summit DC with us this morning. And if you do have an opportunity, please do go ahead and complete the session survey. We really appreciate you being here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.